So this is going to be the video on reincarnation in the sort of Afterlife series that I'm doing here. And so reincarnation, the idea that when you die, your soul moves into essentially a new body. You're reborn in a new physical form. And that could be anything from a human of a different class, or I guess in India it would be caste, for the reason that there's majority Hindus in India. You can move into a different caste, or you might find yourself in the body of a different animal. You know, it's very much dictated by what you've done in your previous life, according to Hindu beliefs. And so you're caught in this sort of never-ending cycle of life and death, birth and rebirth, just endless lives, one after the next. But the interesting thing for me is that you don't necessarily remember your past lives. I think what I've heard Hindus or people who believe in Hinduism or reincarnation in general, because not just Hindus believe in reincarnation, a lot of New Agers here in the United States might believe in reincarnation too, in a very sort of vague sense. But in any case, with reincarnation also comes the idea that you don't necessarily remember your past life, which I find makes it a little interesting. It's kind of a convenience to sort of getting around any questions about reincarnation, and this is what I mean. Like with all of the Afterlife videos I've done, I'm of course going to be pronouncing my skepticism, as is the name of the series. But in the case of reincarnation, you have this idea that people are born, die, and then are reborn in a new body. But they don't remember their previous lives. You have anecdotal cases of supposedly children remembering like very specific details of the life of a person who died recently or who had died in the past. But again, those are anecdotes and tall tales and, you know, like urban legends that when you really analyze them critically and scrutinize the story, it may not have the best sourcing, it may be embellished and exaggerated, and even if it's not, there's every chance that the child may have learned about the life of the other person who died recently from someone who knew about them. There's all sorts of ways that they can glean that information. Or then you might have the idea that, oh, this child seemed to act exactly like a person who died recently. This must be the reincarnation of the other person. But given that we have like personality types and the very real chance that two people may just have similar personalities. I have a similar personality to one of my friends. It's kind of the reason we're friends. We understand each other. There's every chance that what is being perceived as a case of reincarnation might actually just be either an embellished story or just sort of coincidental personality traits that are similar between the two persons, and then a child who may have learned pieces of the story of someone else's life after they died from someone else who heard about them or knew them. So it's not that hard to sort of find an alternate explanation. In any case, I do find it interesting though that in Hinduism you don't necessarily remember your past life, because then what really connects you to your past yous? It would be the soul, of course, but if you were to meet like your past self, like to sort of mash together Hinduism and time travel, what if a person who believed in reincarnation And we had a person who believed in reincarnation, and reincarnation was real. And then we had that person time travel to meet one of their past selves. Would they know that they are the same person reincarnated? I don't know. But my point is that I don't think that these two persons would necessarily realize that they are the same person unless they had some way of realizing that they shared the same soul. And so you would just essentially be meeting yourself in the past, essentially. It's just that in this case, it would be a self that is not very similar to you and does not know that they are you. And so the binding thread throughout all of these lives of what is supposed to be the same person, if they don't have the same memories, if they possibly have different personalities, if they're living different lives just generally, or like if one's a cat and one's a human being, any number of differences, the connector is the soul. This thing that I imagine transfers from one body to the next in this endless sort of line of reincarnation. But just like with heaven and hell and ghosts and all the like, how does that work is the general question I've been asking. How does the soul transfer from one body to the next? How does that work? Because I know there's an answer in Hinduism as to what determines what body you go into next. It's going to be largely determined by the actions that you undertook in your previous life. The concepts of dharma and karma, where if you act immorally in one life, it will affect you in the next life. Or if you aspire to, being a better human being, or just being better, more moral, closer to what the ascetics would see as virtuous, then you can ascend in the hierarchy of being. And this even applies to like some of the Hindu gods, where you have incarnations and reincarnations of certain Hindu gods, like in the Ramayana, where Rama is essentially the reincarnation of, I believe, Vishnu, and Shiva has other gods which are essentially different incarnations of Shiva. So that is sort of the thread that sort of ties together what would otherwise seem like just two completely different people. It's actually the same person, or two different beings, a rat and a human, who might somehow be the same person, the same soul. Although there's kind of a logistical issue that I was thinking about when considering this, is that wouldn't this sort of mean that there's like a finite number of souls on Earth that are constantly moving into new bodies throughout the millennia, throughout eternity, I guess? Wouldn't that then mean that there would have to be some sort of minimum of like living beings on the planet in order to facilitate the lives of all of these souls, the continuation of the physical existence of all of these souls in their continuous reincarnations? Wouldn't that also sort of be thrown into chaos by any change in the population of living beings on the planet? But of course, it's kind of hard to know the number of living beings on the planet when many living beings on the planet are tiny, microscopic. There's enormous populations of tiny fish in the sea that until recently we didn't realize just how numerous they were, to the point where they may in fact make up the majority of the biomass on the entire planet. So there's that. So I guess for Hinduism, they have a seemingly, it is a finite number, but it's such a large finite number that it gives Hindus plenty of wiggle room when dealing with any sort of logistical issues that may arise from a finite number of souls that are sort of reincarnating over and over again. So I guess I'll kind of have to give them that. In any case, and the reason I said it was kind of like a hell in my last video, the sort of idea of constantly and pretty much just forever reincarnating into a new body, is that you never really escape the physical realm the way you would in other religions. Like, it's kind of interesting. In Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, you die, and depending on what you believe, you can go to heaven and be free of sort of the mortal plane. But in Hinduism, you can be stuck in that mortal plane for forever, pretty much. And I mean, it's one of the main reasons why Buddhism is a thing, because essentially, to oversimplify it, it's born out of a desire to break free of that never-ending cycle of reincarnation, to finally get to the point where you are free from the cycle, the loop, this seemingly never-ending loop. And it sort of introduces this idea that's similar to the idea of heaven that I discussed in the earlier video. It's kind of interesting, the idea of Hinduism having this idea within it that makes people sort of uncomfortable to the point where they come up with an entirely new sort of offshoot religion that tries to break free from this uncomfortable idea of forever reincarnating. In terms of Buddhism, and it's trying to break with the unending cycle of reincarnation in Hinduism, it's understandable why that would be so appealing to people who may not be satisfied with the never-ending reincarnation that you get in Hinduism. It seems less satisfying, because even if you go through one of your many lives, and you do your best and you live the most moral and best life you possibly can, you'll be reincarnated in the next life. Now, because of your acts, you may be reincarnated into a body, into a circumstance where you're well off and you live a comfortable life, but then it's almost like a double-edged sword. If you live well in one life and then sort of grant yourself a good life in the next reincarnation, then if you slip up, and which is made easier by the fact that you don't have any memory of your past life, then you can sink back down into sort of immoral action, and you could find yourself sort of constantly swaying in between higher and lower states of being, or like sort of you can find yourself weaving your way through the hierarchy of being forever, and never really getting to a point where you are like at a optimal or at the top of that hierarchy. And so for anybody, like everyone would just be constantly weaving through this hierarchy of being. I guess I've heard the idea in Hinduism that even if you don't remember your past life, there are still certain traits about, let's say, your personality or just you that may be retained. Ineffable parts of you that continue no matter your circumstance, your body. It's just like things about you which never really go away, no matter how many times you're reincarnated, or something to that effect. So it's sort of like having your cake and eat it too, but I guess if they believe it's the same soul, then aside from just a soul, I imagine there might be other things about the soul, that may carry on through the different lives. This past just the thread of the soul linking these lives together, these seemingly different people together as one person. You may also have like personality traits, likes, dislikes, maybe vices, but each incarnation of you would need to overcome that vice in order to ascend to a higher level of being. But then there's also the idea that, and again, to just go back to the logistics, so I imagine at some point Brahma, Brahma, the creator, essentially creates the souls which will inevitably go through reincarnation, if I'm understanding this correctly. And so at some point there's sort of to use sort of Platonic language, and I hope I'm referencing the right philosopher there's sort of a form of you, of each soul, or I guess the soul would be the form, but like the soul of you is sort of like the base, or because the soul, I imagine, has to exist in like a first body, and then it continues on in this ever continuing series of reincarnations. But I imagine at some point there must be some first you, which is sort of the archetype of you, the archetype of the self in Hinduism. Either that, or it's just like a infinite set of reincarnations backwards and forwards, which is even more mind-bending in terms of like how you would explain cause and effect, start and beginning, all of that sort of thing. But but then there's also the idea of like the gods themselves, like Hindu, the three is sort of like primary gods in Hinduism that upon which many other gods are based, or are incarnations of those three gods, which is Vishnu, Shiva, and Brahma, which in some Hindu sort of theology can be thought to be three beings which represent one sort of supreme being. It's kind of interesting how many polytheistic beliefs over time start to sort of veer into monotheism after a while, or I think there's another word for like sort of polytheism, but which also has a aspect of monotheism. It's just that monotheistic deity is represented in many other deities. There's a name for that, I'm just not remembering it right now. But in any case, this reincarnation cycle even applies to the Hindu gods. Like in the case of Rama, he was the incarnation of Vishnu. Now, whether the Hindu gods decide to do this, like they can choose to do this as a sort of, humbling journey for themselves, I guess. I imagine they could. I mean, they're gods. So there's also that interesting aspect, which makes Hinduism ever so slightly different from the Abrahamic religions. But except for Christianity, in which God, the God of the Bible, in the New Testament, incarnates in a way as Jesus, but he's still him, but he's also Jesus. They are the same, depending on the sort of Christian you are. For some Christians, they are different. For some, they are one and the same. Depends on which denomination. I could get into just a whole bunch of videos just talking about different aspects of Christian theology that I find either don't make sense, or are just sort of interesting to think about when you consider the different sorts of interpretations of like one idea. But anyways, something that I want to sort of finish this video off on, sort of to get away from all the logistical ideas, the logistical problems, my skepticism of it, because It's much the same as my discussions of heaven and hell, and then to go back to the soul as to, where it goes, how is it determined. But in Hinduism, you kind of have an idea of how it's determined, but also the mechanism by which it moves, all of that sort of thing. But then there's also sort of the sad part of Hinduism and the way it's affected the classes or caste system in India, where it allows people who are better off and in a position of power or a position of wealth, who may be self-interested, to sort of blame the poor for their own problems. If you believe in karma and reincarnation and all the like, then you can look to the less fortunate, like, let's say, the untouchables, which is a whole caste in Hinduism, and say they deserve their lot in life because of actions which they partook of in a previous life. The reason they are in their situation is because of their own actions in a previous life, which they can't necessarily remember, and so they are pushed to be, model citizens or model human beings in the life that they're leading now. It's just kind of sad because it sort of facilitates maybe class warfare. It can facilitate gross inequities. It can facilitate the use of the poor for the benefit of the rich, potentially, although you would have to apply those same Hindu beliefs of morality to the better off, so maybe that might counteract that. But the potential is there, which any Hindu who happens to watch this at some point can correct me if I'm wrong, and I imagine you will, because this is your belief system. But I don't know, it just seems like there's a potential there for sort of misusing it to your own ends, which is a shame. And it's one of the sort of costs that can come out of religious ideas. And there are costs to the religious ideas in the other religions, the Abrahamic religions, all the like. But I guess I just wanted to sort of touch on that because it's interesting that in much the same way that heaven and hell sort of affect how you live your life now, so does the idea of reincarnation and the ideas of karma, which is like interlinked with or interlocked with that idea of reincarnation. And so I guess it's probably another reason why Buddhism is so appealing. You have the idea of being able to break from this cycle, to eventually break free and reach nirvana and return to the universal soul, live in everlasting peace, not needing of anything. It's a lot like the idea of heaven for Christians, I imagine, except it may, depending on the form of Buddhism, lack the God, and it would just be sort of souls existing in this sort of unified thing. The universal soul concept has always been a little nebulous to me, but I guess I haven't talked to enough Buddhists, so. In any case, yeah. And then there's but then even in Buddhism, you may not necessarily remember your past life, so you don't know how close or how far you are to the pinnacle, being at like the level of like the Dalai Lama or beyond to nirvana. I mean, I guess it would push you to try to live as best you can while you're alive. If you believe in Buddhism, then, while you're living as a Buddhist, I guess with the lack of knowledge of your past life, it would sort of push you to want to act in a way which lets you sort of achieve nirvana, achieve levels of morality and distance from, or like reliance on worldly pleasures and sort of being able to distance yourself from the things which would hold you back from reaching nirvana in the mortal plane, essentially it gives you an incentive. That lack of knowledge can give you an incentive to do better. But, in any case, it's just like in heaven and hell, there's still sort of this question of the how do you prove the metaphysical claims of reincarnation? Because in Hinduism, it would a lot of it could really come down to proving the soul to exist, and then showing that it incarnates in different bodies and showing how that works. But absent that, I really have no reason to believe in reincarnation, even though a lot of people, even outside of India and largely predominantly Hindu regions, even people outside of that believe in reincarnation. And it's a interesting idea, but I just don't see a reason to really believe it. Just like any other theological belief. But yeah, I guess I had a lot to talk about on this one, but the next one will be on souls, so it'll be sort of the end of this little series. Well, thank you to anyone who watched, and bye-bye.